Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2014 Geraldine R. Dodge Festival. My name is BJ Ward. I'm the MC. I'm just going to ask that if you have any devices that make noise, if you could turn them off, please. The name of this session is a conversation on craft. Please welcome the former Poet Laureate of the United States, Rita Dove.
First we get the technical stuff settled. Please let me know if you can't hear me in the back or anywhere else out there. But I'm hoping that this will be a conversation, because as soon as you ask me a question, you won't be able to stop me. The first thing I want to confess is that I really prefer standing up than sitting down, but that's okay, I'll sit. I think better standing. And in fact, I have a standing desk at home. I have sitting ones too, you know, but the standing desk, I don't know what it is. It's the alignment or something. It's, I don't know, I feel like an integer in the world when I'm standing. But I'm going to start by reading a poem which might get us, you know, going for the whole time. Because I must confess that I am a little suspicious of craft talks, only because I think craft is something you gotta walk. I mean, you gotta do it, do it, do it. And this is gonna go all over the place, I hope, you know, with your questions and with my examples. This is a poem that was prompted by one of my students. And I'm going to read, I think, two poems at the beginning, and then we'll see what happens from there on in. But this poem was prompted by one of my students who had graduated and started an online magazine of prose poems and wanted a prose poem. And I think I had written a couple, I've only published, I think, a couple of prose poems, 2 or 3. But I said to him, I wrote to him actually, and I said, you know, I don't know if I believe in the prose poem. But let me think about the prose poem. And this is what came out. Prose in a small space. It's supposed to be prose if it runs on and on, isn't it? All those words, too many to fall into rank and file, stumbling bare-assed drunk onto the field, reporting for duty, yes sir, spilling out as shamelessly as the glut from a mega-billion-dollar chemical facility, just the amount of glittering effluvium it takes to transport a little girl across a room, beige carpet thick under her Oxfords, curtains blousy with spring. Is that the scent of daffodils drifting in? Daffodils don't smell, but prose doesn't care. Prose likes to hear itself talk. Prose is development and denouement, anticipation hovering near the canopies, lust rampant in the antepasta. For example, a silver fork fingered sadly as the heroine crumples a linen napkin in her lap, to keep from crying out at the sight of Lord Campion's regal brow inclined tenderly toward the wealthy young widow. Prose applauds such syntactical dalliances. Then, is it poetry if it's confined? Trembling along its axis, a flagpole come alive in high wind, flapping its radiant sleeve for attention. Over here, it's me. While the white spaces, air, field, early morning silence before the school bell, shape themselves around that one bright seizure. And if that's so, what do we have here? A dream or 3 paragraphs? We have white space too. Is this music? As for all the words left out, banging at the gates, we could let them in, but where would we go with our orders, our stuttering pride? Thank you. let me show you. It is 3 paragraphs, and the right justified. Right and left. So it is prose confined in a small space. And when I was writing this, I realized that I was actually kind of writing an ars poetica, and, because though you can see each one of these paragraphs, stanzas, whatever, are about the same size, it takes much, much longer to say the last paragraph or stanza than the first 2. The words are slipperier, in the first 2, stanzas than the last. And every time particularly in the first paragraph, every time it tries to get poetic, I kind of slap it and say, let's keep going. But at the end, it really does become much more like poetry that is in the shape of prose. There's a line where it says there's white space here too. And there is. I mean, there is the white space of the frame. It's all contained in a very orderly sense. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that aspect of craft, which is the aspect of the visible silence of a poem. When I say the visible silence, the first aspect of that is simply the silhouette of the poem. Is it a skinny poem? How much white space is there around the page? What does that do when you look at it on the page? What does that do to your attention, right? And what does that tell you about the poem or set your mood before you even begin to read it? I'm talking about this as if you were the reader, but this is, of course, what happens as you're writing the poem, too, because you're subconsciously, I think, thinking about that impact. When there's more white space, and I think this is kind of fairly elementary, when there's more white space, we listen very hard to what isn't being said. When there is less white space, we listen underneath the words because we think they're going on and on. I think subconsciously that's what happens. And I love prose. It's fine. I've written a novel. I've written short stories. This was not a hate poem toward prose, but it was also saying that prose does different things with that moment of captured white, space around us. I think that what poetry can often do is it's almost as if you are encapsulated in time, looking down the well, whereas in prose you are encapsulated in time, walking in the garden past the well. And sometimes you look at it, but you keep going. It's just a different sense of time and elasticity. The question becomes, however, how do you get this when you're writing? And how do you know? I mean, it sounds so, and I think this is why I'm a little suspicious of craft talks. It sounds so wise to say all this stuff. But who cares about that? You want to do it. You want to be able to do it. And for that, you need examples. For that, you need to just keep writing. One of the things that I tell myself when I'm writing and tell my students when I'm writing is that when you are writing and rewriting in the act of revision, you have to be absolutely ruthless and absolutely playful at the same time. That you cannot take yourself too seriously because, yes, everything is dead serious, but you're trying to get at something that for which there are no words, right? I mean, that's what poetry does. At the end, we're wiped clean. If that's what you're trying to do with words, in order to arrive at no words, you're going to need every piece of equipment and, artillery at your disposal, which means you have to be playful because self-consciousness will kill a poem quicker than, anything. It will kill it quicker than anything. So what I often suggest is that once you're writing something, if you get stuck in it, it's time for radical measures. Do terrible things to your poem. Fold it in half vertically. Cut it in half. Take the left-hand side and look at it. Try to write a poem from the left-hand side. Honoring the left-hand side. Not trying to fill in what you have to the right. Do the same with the right-hand side. This sounds horrible to do, and it feels bad when you cut a poem in half. But what it does do is kind of open up the syntax for you. It shows you where your prepositions are. It shows you, what tropes you're falling into. It also destroys the silhouette of the poem so that you are compelled to fill it out again. I'm going to stop in a minute. I'm going to read another poem, but first let me say two quick things, and then we'll go on. One of them, do I want to say two or one? Two, maybe. I said that this was the visible white space, right? Or the together white space. There is another aspect of writing of a poem that is absolutely essential, and that is the invisible music of the poem. Because what it does is engage the entire body when you read a poem. If a poem moves mellifluously, you are going to slip along. That may be a good thing, it may not be a good thing, but depending on the words that you use, it will keep you will start taking your breath that way. One of the reasons why I think free verse came up and took over in a way is because the whole nature of our language changed. In Shakespeare's time, iambic pentameter was not that far removed from the way people spoke. But we have so many contractions, so many shortcuts, the way life has sped up, that it seems very stately, I guess you could say, to stick to iambic pentameter. If you use the rhythms of Emily Dickinson, the quatrain, the American hymn, that says a certain thing as well. And so you have to always be aware of that music. Sometimes you get your effect from a poem because of the way it sounds, how much breath the reader has to take in order to reach the end of the line. Tells you how much tension you're going to load them with. And these things are all under the surface. They're all kind of amorphous and hard to pinpoint. I believe that we subconsciously look at a poem and figure out where we're going to take our breaths before we even get into it. That when we hit that end of the line, we take a mini breath. But if the word that is used in that line is one with lots of consonants in it, it slows us down and we kind of stutter. All of these things engage the entire body so that you are actively involved in the poem. If there are any questions, you should just get up and start walking over there right now, okay? Because I'm laying a whole bunch of stuff from all over the place on, and I want to know where your interests are so that we can keep going. Because I could talk about the image.
There are mics set up at the end.
Please
of
do.
these also.
And then I'll continue with something else. Yes.
Hi, I have kind of a long question that's going to take us in a different direction. I hope that's okay.
So,
I'm 48 years old, and I've been writing poetry for a long time, and I'm doing a lot of reading as part of my training. But one of the problems I'm having is that I'm trying to find influences, and I'll read people, but I'm realizing that they have their limitations, and then I just hit this big disappointment. And I was wondering if you went through that as part of your own development as an artist and as a writer, and what did you do with that? Like, how did you talk yourself through it? And an example I can give is like Elizabeth Bishop's work. I know she's really good and I admire it, but when I read her, to me she's like emotionally constricted, and I can feel it. And I was wondering, like, and I'm just hitting that a lot. A lot of like, it's like the giants have clay feet feeling. And did you go through that? And like, I really hope that phase does not last a long time. So if you could speak to that, and I'm sorry it kind of goes in a different direction.
No, it doesn't actually, because what it does is hit upon something that I did want to talk about, which is how do you find your own voice? And it is a finding of your voice. It's not a creating of it, and you find it. I think that influences, what happens is that, at least in my case, what happens, you become influenced by someone, and then you say, oh, no, but I want to, that's okay, but I need to go this way. And then you step and you do something a little bit different, and then you find another influence, or a poem. And my influence was always poem by poem. It was never poet by poet necessarily. It was like a poem that just knocked me off my feet, or made me angry, because it was another way of being knocked off your feet. And the conversation with that poet becomes for either adulation and wanting to write like that, but then veering off because no, that's not it for me, or being upset about the poem and writing in retaliation, which can happen too. Eventually, what happens, and I really, really recommend, imitation. Imitation for, not to be published. This is just the craft. This is just the apprenticeship of writing. These are poems that may never see the light of a page, of a printed page. But what you do is you like something or you're stuck, you go find something that speaks to you for that moment. You do not have to love it. You don't have to be blown away by it. You can be blown away by part of it. But try to imitate it. Try to imitate either the sound or the subject matter, and you will find that gradually you will be, changing things, veering off to do something else, because that's interesting. A different subject matter, because that's speaking to you. What you're doing is discovering the things that move you, the things that make you. And eventually your voice happens. If you have, and I know that feeling where you suddenly say, oh, well, I wanted this to be something for me, but it isn't. That's all right. I think that it's impossible. I cannot read Elizabeth Bishop and write afterwards. I happen to love her work. But there's something about it that I just say, oh, well, I can't do anything after that. Because it is such a beautifully closed system. So there are some people I know I can't, if I'm going to write, I can't read them right beforehand. I confess that I have never liked Ezra Pound. And I know that's sacrilegious to say that. But I read him every year. I set aside some time and I read it. I keep trying. But you don't have to like everybody, it's okay. And it's also really useful, if you don't like something, to write a response to it. Write a response to it. If you say, and I would also, when I say write a response, I don't necessarily mean that you have to respond to the topic that is in that, whatever is in the poem. Write a response in terms of the syntax, or in terms of the meter, or in terms of the way the person uses imagery. Or I write a context in terms of the prosody. That you'll discover that incredible things can happen like that. A lot of the art I find of poetry, of rewriting, is the ability to distract yourself enough to get at the real truth of something. think it was The Simpsons, he used to take, whenever he got stuck, he took the garbage out. And I know that Kurt Vonnegut used to have a bar in his office so that he would get stuck, he would get up and do some, which I think is pretty admirable. I wouldn't do that. But it also has to do with something, you want it so badly that you want to kind of strangle it, wrestle it to the page, and sometimes it's flirting on the sides. And prosody can help you a lot. And suddenly you say, okay, I'm writing a pantoum. I know I can't write a pantoum, but I'm going to try it anyway. And the struggle of trying to write that thing, suddenly something good slips in. You have a question?
Yes, I kind of got stuck on Ezra Pound. If you don't like someone, of course you have opinions, everybody does, they could be the greatest poet on earth, but to you, just doesn't speak to you. What do you get out of reading him every year, besides reinforcing the fact that you No, what would you get out of reading somebody over and over that you really don't like?
Well, first of all, because I want to make sure that it isn't, me, and also because we change, we grow, and I read him every year. There are things about Ezra Pound, there are moments I like, there are lines that I like, that I get irritated all over again, but I keep reading him because I keep trying to figure out that world, and I feel, gosh, it's sort of like going back and doing your scales as a musician. You go back and you do them to keep your fingers nimble, and I feel like it's probably my loss, that I don't.
So I kind of hear, it's kind of a growth experience, either way, whether you like someone or you don't like someone, and maybe things will change, maybe they won't, maybe it'll even get worse, who knows, right?
Oh, that could happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There's a question in the back? Yep. Okay. Well,
prose poem.
yes.
Do you think sitting here today you could take that prose poem and you could turn it into something that you would call a poem? And if you couldn't, why not?
Oh, it's a great question, actually. I couldn't. I wouldn't want to. Because part of the experience, I guess I want to say, that's in the poem is exactly kind of pushing against the limits of this river of language. What pops out of that river, that effluvium of language that I'm exaggerating, as prose. And so to put it into poetry would give us more space to contemplate things. There are things that, one of the things that I kind of realized as I was writing it was that it hurt sometimes to throw a good image away. I felt like I was throwing away because it was stuck in a mass of prose. But that's exactly what I wanted. I really wanted to say, I'm not going to give you time to think about this. This is the kind of prose I'm against. I'm not all prose is like that, obviously it's not. But it's a different rhythm. And when you enter into a prose, I think when we enter into a larger unit of prose, it's a different kind of a pact that we make. We say, okay, I'm going to be with you for a while. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to look around. I might take a breath. Every word matters, but I might sneeze. It's okay. Whereas with poetry, it's a very different. We're like, okay, all right, and you let it soak in. So I wouldn't want to.
The idea of the term called the free write, where you're just writing to figure out what you want to write about. And so I'm kind of wondering about the push-pull between what we might call free write, which I consider to be prose until you figure out where you're going, and the prose poem. Where do you see that dynamic?
Well, the prose poem still has, the prose poem absolutely has its, what do you want to call it? Its focus, its way of, it's not free in the sense that a free write is. It does have an energy that's directed in a certain way. And in fact, there's some beautiful prose poems. I love prose poems too. I just don't write them because I love so much the silence that's happening, between stanzas, the ends of lines, between words even. But a prose poem has a free write is intended to be a glorious kind of confetti, that's going around. And later on, you're going to gather it and shape it. So the intention is completely different. You, and then you, and then you. Okay, go back.
I liked what you said about ruthlessness and playfulness, but I'd like to kind of explore that a little more. It seems to me that, for me, the playfulness kind of, I think about inspiration and spontaneity. Ruthless brings to mind editing and refining and judgment, and two very different things that have their place, but they also have to be, it seems that one can get in the way of the other, and I'm just wondering about how you work with both of those things, the kind of the process around that.
Okay, yeah, because they can get in the way of each other, and in fact, they are destined to get in the way of each other, and yet both are necessary. I'm constantly bouncing back and forth when I'm revising between ruthlessness and playfulness. And of course, it varies from poem to poem, but what I tend to do, just quickly to give you a sense of my process, I tend to work on more than one poem at once. I have fragments everywhere, and I'm not talking just about the fragments that you put in your notebook, and I have that too, but I'm talking about a poem where I have part of the second stanza in the middle of the page, and then it's, just sitting there. And then there's another poem where I have 2/3 of it ready, and another one where there's only 2 or 3 lines. So I started doing this when I was in my 20s. I thought that I had to, before that I kept thinking, well, you start a poem, you work on it, you revise it some more, because in creative writing programs, of course, you have to turn in some poems. So that's how I did them, but I worked very slowly, and I thought that I would never, ever be able to get a book together. And then I had some really wonderful advice from a teacher, from Louise Gluck, actually, who told me, who just said, you should look at the way you live your life, your everyday life, and structure your writing around that. She says, how do you walk across a room? And I thought about it. I thought, I never just go from one spot to the next and say, I'm going to go over there and, pick up that glass. I have about 5 things in my hands, and I'm, thinking about this, and I'll drop this off in that room, and I'll go. I thought, I'm always juggling all these things, and I'm happiest when I'm juggling all these things. It might come from my majorette days, I'm not sure. But, it's kind of, yeah. So I thought, why am I trying to just, beat this poor poem to death? So I changed everything radically and decided to live in fragments, which was terrifying for a while. And then I would clip the revisions together, and then I had to figure out how do I find my fragments again, since obviously these poems often didn't have titles at the beginning. And I decided to organize my files according to color, because I love color, and because it's subliminal. It's, I could say, I feel like a blue poem today, and I could go into that, and this is the ruthless part of it, the rigor. Sometimes I go into work and I have not an idea in my head. I'm not going to sit around and wait for inspiration. It's there, but but we do everything to keep away from it. So sit down, think, okay, yellow. I just want to do yellow today. And I'll go into my folder to find the scraps of poems that are in the yellow folder. Gradually, they come together. What happens for me is that I'll finish 2 or 3 poems at once. It's a great week. but then there's this trough where they're all kind of just like laying around on the floor. But I know that that's going to happen, so I don't feel too bad about it. But it's back and forth like that.
Thank you. First of all, it's really nice to see you. Your book on your grandparents is one of my all-time favorites, so I really like it. I'm a writer as well, a poet. I've been doing here lately prose poems, some short ones. I also come from a tradition of spoken word and performance as well, which are really long poems, a lot of repetition, just a lot of words and everything. And I'm trying to make that leap to creating work that stands up on the page. And one of the rules I'm giving myself is that I make a poem fit in one page. And so when you talk about the silence, for me, it's a issue in the process to cut what I've been calling it, I have to cut the fat. I have to cut the fat.
Okay.
So what advice would you give someone like me who's struggling to do that? And then it's two-part. You also said something about you thought you'd never get a book together. And I do have a chapbook now and another one coming out in January, but I want a full book too. I want a real book, a book I can throw at someone. And so any advice you can give, any advice you can give me on doing a first collection, but also helping me to cut the fat.
Cut the fat. It's a very interesting question. I'm glad you brought up this whole idea of stage and page, because I feel there are many poets who say, "Oh, spoken word is not poetry," and I feel, this is just another way of using the word. It is music is in it. Performance is integral to spoken word. Therefore, it's partly drama, and because of that. There are other quasi-rules that you have to adhere to, as you mentioned. Repetition, you have to realize your audience is going to be sitting out there for a while, and someone might cough, and therefore something you want them to hear, you have to be aware of that. They are never going to have the resource of looking at it on the page.
Right.
Therefore, you cannot give them something that they're going to go off and then miss the next 3 lines. It's a very calculated creativity, which has its roots really in drama, but poetry also has its roots in drama. So I mean, that's the one thing. Now you're going to the page, so of course the other things apply besides just simply cutting the fat, realizing that the reader has time for contemplation and realizing that the visual aspect may be important. There's a couple things you can do, and this is for everyone. I mean, I think that when you're revising, sometimes, and this comes down to playfulness and ruthlessness again, that there are things that I'll just do when I'm looking at a poem and I'm stuck in it. I will look at the first line and see if the poem can do without it. I often, sometimes, I just take it off and live with it for a day. Sometimes it goes back, but sometimes I take it off. Ditto with the last line, or the second to the last line, which often is a little bit squirrely. You try to figure out what are the things that you do in your everyday, in your life. How do you lead into conversations? How do you exit a room? Because I think subconsciously we do the same things in our homes. Also, I always look at my revisions at the hour of day that I am the least friendly to myself, which is morning. I'm a nocturnal person, so the very first thing in the morning, the poem is sitting there. Before my coffee, I'll look at the draft. If I can tolerate any of that, I might be on my way.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm a writer as well. I'm in an MFA program, and one of my mentors actually said a poem is a breathing walk. And so whenever you said craft was walking, it just directly connected me to that. I actually wanted to talk about, well, I would like for you to talk about how breathing and walking works in terms of imagery, because we've already sort of talked about white space and word choice.
Whoa, this is rough. It's excellent. Okay. I'm going to start with image before you start walking with it. Okay? Well, we all know an image is a picture. Usually it's saying something is like something else, so we see the relationship. Okay, that's the static sense of it. And there's a certain way of using imagery. I don't know, I think I kind of call it it is a walking image, where you say something is like something else, and then you take that something else and you keep spinning the image out. Let me see if I can think of an example. I'm horrible at examples. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. And then you go on to describe why they are not. If this relationship is faulty between the two images, it just doesn't work. I had a list of really bad images. Which, let me do this, and then this one's just also because it's fun. If I can find it. Well, why are these bad? Okay. Her face was a perfect oval, like a circle that had its two sides gently compressed by a thigh master. Why is that? I mean, besides being hilarious, but if you're going to describe someone's face as a perfect oval, and the sense is that there's tranquility and beauty in that. You do not want struggle and sweat and tears, and you don't want a damn thigh master in there. Her breasts, these are real images people wrote, sorry. Her breasts heaved like a stormy ocean, and her pointed nipples were like hypodermics washed up on the shore. I don't know what to do about it. I don't even know what to do. I mean, that's just sad. But I can't know words. But I'm going to concentrate on one and walk it for you. Her eyes were as brown as a cup of coffee. Now, what's wrong with that? It's the cup that's being described, and not her eyes were as brown as coffee. I don't know if I want sloshy brown eyes, like that. But as a cup of coffee, first of all, there are two eyes, and there's only one cup. And, so this is the dis-ease we feel with this. Now, if we had a great image, I wish I could find one. Well, anyway. But if you're taking a great image, like a negative one, like when Mr. Eyes or nothing like the sun, and you start to describe the day or the sun, then we keep that negative there, and we feel like we're dancing. I mean, a moving image is something, and it is a dance. I'm trying to think if there's any other way to do that. You want to ask me another part of a question to lead me on? Is that all right? You're taking notes. All right. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if I answered that. Because, but that there's this thing that you enter into this dance with the poem. You can see at one instance, if you're looking at the poem, how long your dance is going to last. You can't tell that when someone's reading on stage. That's a different thing. It's interesting. But you watch their body to see how long it's going to last, don't you? And so that gives you a sense of how much stamina you're going to need. I mean, stamina in a good way, not in a negative. How much you're going to need, how much energy, how much attention. And then you see the line where you turn, and so that gives you a little moment to, or maybe there are some stanzas. But there's always underneath that moment silence. There's always silence, or the white space. There's always silence. The words are like stepping stones that we use to get across the void, which is why I think what makes poetry so, such a lifesaver for us, because it helps us to bear the void underneath, the silence. It's the things we can't say, the things that, all of our failures. And every communication is in some way, there's a little edge of failure in it. Sorry. It's what keeps us revising relentlessly, but it's also what keeps us hoping forever. This is why I'd say that one of the things that when the despair begins to take over, you resort to games, I guess you could say, in order to shake yourself up. Because remember, language is your tool. Just as a painter uses oils or acrylics or marble or whatever, you are using language. The difficulty with language, using language, is that it's all around you. Everybody uses language. You use it in a different way. Not everybody walks around with a hunk of marble, to do a sculpture, but everybody uses language. So to enter into that space where you are hyper-aware of the language and how do you get people to hear it again and to hear that word takes an enormous amount of energy. And underneath that always is a sense that I don't have it right. I just don't have it right. I mean, I always feel that way. I always do. But that's okay. We are not perfect beings. You have to bear a lot of failure, bad writing. I think that's okay. Yes.
What influence can you do to make your poem last a long time on the mind of the reader?
What can you do to
Repeat the question, please.
The question, I believe, was what can one do to make your poem last a long time in the reader? A poem doesn't convince, actually, through its words, through the meaning of the words. It doesn't really convince that way. That's part of it, but the real conviction comes because we feel that we've drawn it into our bodies, or it has drawn us into its body, and we become one. And how do you become one with another person's thoughts, with another person's desires? It's because we begin to breathe, smell, taste, in sync. That kind of experience is something that happens in music without words, obviously, I think James Richardson was saying he had music envy, and yeah, there's that kind of music envy. Musicians just do it. You orchestrate a poem so that your reader also goes through it. Let me share a poem with you, which takes the other end of a student-inspired thing. Because one of the things that I do with my students is I give them individual writing assignments at some point during the semester. It's called a wild card. It is always geared toward them, that particular person, always something that I think that they're avoiding. And it's so impossible to do that they usually kind of go, ah, as soon as they open up their envelope. And it comes at any time during the semester. Some of them can be, 2 weeks into the semester, sometimes it's the last week. They have different due dates, so I never give them long to think about it. And when someone complains and says, but I have a test today, I said, that's life, man. This is what life does to you. Sometimes things get thrown at you. Just go for it. In the end, they've come to love it, and in fact, kids will say, I haven't got mine yet. I said, thank you. But then I thought, there are things like go out in the field, at sunset, and look for something purple. And, write from that perspective. And they're like, oh, what is she doing to me? And I'll give them lots of other rules, like 5-line stanzas, please. or question and answer. But then I thought I needed to do it myself. I mean, if I'm going to hand these things out to them, and I've been doing it for 20, 25 years, that I should give myself a wild card too. And to be fair, it should be really hard. And then I decided that I would write a poem. I had no topic yet. I would write a poem in which each line had to begin with a certain letter. In other words, the first line could begin with all O's, the second line could begin with all P's, but that's the way the breath, the silhouette of the poem was going to be handled, through complete alliteration and assonance, line by line. And I think I chose it because I like alliteration, but too much is too much, right? So I just started. I thought, well, okay, what do you start with? If there's going to be a poem about like that, I'm just going to start with oh, oh God. So I started with oh, that dictated the first line. And it became a poem about something that I could not write about for a long time, which was my, I have a bum right knee, and I do dancing, so it's really a drag. But it is that constant reminder of the physical, kind of sloughing away of the body that we don't like to think about. But every time I take a step, I think of this knee. And I had gotten to the point that I never thought of it as part of my body. I would say, oh, you knee. Like I'm always looking at the knee. So I thought, okay, it's an ode. It's an ode to my right knee. And this is what came out of that. Ode to my right knee. Oh, obstreperous one, ornery outside of ordinary protocols, paramilitary proby par excellence. Every evidence you yield yells. No noise, too tough to tackle, tears springing such sudden salt when walking wrenches. Haranguer, hag, hanger on, how much more maddening, insidious imperfection. Membranes matter-of-factly corroding, crazed cartilage calmly chipping away as another arduous ambulation begins, bone bruising bone. Leathery Lothario, lone laboring gladiator grappling, groveling for favor, fair weather forecaster, fickle friend, jive jiggy joint, kindly keep kicking. So, thank you. I took the inspiration from the students who were obviously, when they were doing these wild cards, though they complained madly, would always have some spark of something in it that was utterly wild and beautiful. And I thought, thank you, students. Thank you for trusting me enough to do this crazy thing, and now I'm going to have to trust myself enough to do this crazy thing. Now, obviously with a writing exercise that insane, it's going to be amusing. The poem has to become amusing, and that's one thing I learned, that, that when you use sound so obviously and so deliberately, so much over the top, the usage of it becomes a game. Everyone's listening to see, oh, where's the next consonant coming from, where's the next line coming from, where are the turns. But it also helped me free up what I call the tyranny of the right margin, which is a great desire to make that right, not to have it be too jagged. I'm a Virgo, so I fight against this all the time. I'm like always trying to even up my line and say, no. This is the way it really should be. This helped me actually do that. And so what's happening after this poem are poems which are a lot more jagged. Thank goodness. So, some more questions? In the back? Get a break from yourself. She asked if I ever get tired of myself. Yes, I do. I think we all do. And there's this feeling of, gosh, why am I doing this? Why in the world do I keep trying to put, and what good does it serve anyway in the world? And I've had those moments. What I did, one of the hardest things for me is that when I have those moments, no one believes me. And so they say, oh, no, and they want another poem, and I feel like I can't churn them out like butter. I mean, this takes time. So what I do tend to do, I'll take a break. And this is a terrible thing to say to you, because I'm supposed to say that you write every day. But I will take a break. It's a break that sometimes but my breaks are different. I will take a break by writing some prose or writing a play, or trying to do a little radio play, things that I don't want to publish, and I'm not going to publish, because the other specter of the end, for me at least, is that if I write something, someone will want to publish it, and I think, I don't know if it's good enough yet, leave me alone till I figure it out. So I'll write things like that. But if you get tired of yourself, go read something else. Then get away from yourself. Go off and read something, and read something wildly outside of your field too. But not with the intent of mining it for poems. Just you have to spark your sense of wonder again. That's what it is. Because it's damn hard work. And you have the sense of wonder, and then you're sitting there trying to write, and all the words sound like, it's just words, right? It's a hard thing. It also helps to write from the point of view of something very small. Something in the corner of the room that no one sees. Dust mote. I mean really small, or one of these flags, or the bar in one of these flags. And to be absolutely true to it. And look down on yourself.
Along the lines of taking a break, I think it was Horace who suggested that if you write a poem, put it aside for 7 years, and then come back to it and see if you still like it. People didn't live that long in those days. This morning, Billy Collins was saying he writes 4 or 5 drafts of the same new poem, all on the same day, and that after that point he makes at most minor changes. What are your thoughts on what it takes to get the optimal distance from one's own investment in the poem and to be able to approach it more critically?
Mm-hmm. First of all, everyone is different, so you don't know how long it's going to take you to get that optimal distance. And that's a matter of you and your muse and figuring out where your limits are. I, for instance, my revisions are, first of all, I do all those fragments, but in the sense of clipping it together, there's usually 35 or 40, at least. And I love them. I mean, I actually love getting into it like that. I also do some things that I think, Billy and I are radically different in these things. I realized the other day we were on stage, it's like, I'm like, no, I don't do it that way. And he's like, no, I don't. But, I do save things, but also I do this because I'm doing all the scraps. I do save everything. And sometimes when I am stuck, I look at the very first draft, the one that was really awful and leaden, and, but then suddenly there's one word. I'm like, oh, I lost that word. After all 35, I lost the word I needed. Sometimes because the word was there before the rest of the poem was there, right? And it just didn't make any sense. But it was there, kind of blinking its little firefly light, trying to coax me over there. I feel that I do put a poem away after a while. When it finally begins to cohere, when it finally gets to the point where I move and I write by hand, and eventually I'll go to the computer. But when I print it out, I scribble over it all over again. When I see its shape and I know that it's almost there, then that's the time when I might concentrate on one poem only and write and work on it several times that day. I usually put a poem away for at least 3 weeks, sometimes even longer, and keep taking it out and testing it again without coffee, testing it to see in different times of day, light, to see if it's still doing what I want it to do. And that is part of the getting the distance on something. One of the hardest moments I had to get a distance on a poem, it took about a couple of years, was a poem called Parsley, which is about the massacre of the Haitians during the time of Trujillo. It was because the historical event was so big and so horrific that I was having, and yet I was haunted by it. So the poem took a long, long time to get written. The first part is a villanelle, and after I finished it, I showed it to my husband, Fred, who is a novelist, a German novelist, so he had that double distance on the poem, and can be immensely practical. And so he looked at it and he said, "That's not all, is it?" I stomped off. We have a rule. Don't look at each other's desks before the other person wants to show you something. And if you get criticism, you can stomp off, but do not argue. Just walk off, wait for a day, come back, and then present your argument. So I stomped off because I knew he was right. And then I had another about year and a half of trying to write the second half of that poem. But I put it in the drawer, and I take it out once a week, and I kind of look at it or around it. So it really just depends. I do believe that sometimes you can grow out of a poem. There's a point where you give up or you stop writing it because that's it. You've moved somewhere else, and it's what it needs to be at that moment, and then I won't touch it anymore. Even if I look at it on the page and I'm about to read it out loud, I'm thinking, damn, that's not a good word. Okay.
Can I ask you a question about this pesky thing called voice? So I did a workshop with a poet named Philip Schultz, and he takes the position that, I may be oversimplifying or getting it wrong, but essentially that every time we write, we have a persona narrator when we write in the first person, and that persona narrator changes every time, that there's a different persona narrator that we're searching for in order to convey every piece. Billy Collins, by contrast, in a lecture he gave recently said, I have this persona that I'm sort of stuck with, this kind of urban, somewhat sarcastic, cynical guy, and I'd like to get rid of him, but I just can't. He's who I've become. And so the question and I can see both points of view. I can see both points of view, but I often hear people say, well, I'm looking for my voice. And I'm thinking, why do I have to have one voice? Do you have one voice? If you do, what is it?
I don't think I have one voice, but probably someone else can hear it. It's sort of like when you notice you notice in your grandchild. We have a new grandchild. I can see her great-grandmother in her, and my husband can't. It's sort of you see. So I don't know, but I never felt like I had to look. I was searching for a voice. I simply wrote. Let someone else figure it out. I don't know. I think there's just too much of an emphasis on this voice stuff. And in finding one's voice, as I said earlier, you just kind of tack along until it's a way of talking to and back at other poets, and then you discover this is the way I like to do it best, and then something happens in your life and your voice changes, just like your attitude changes about things, or your shape, changes, unfortunately. It's what happens, but to fret about voice is going about the act of writing ass backwards, I think. You write. you work out what it is that's driving you, and you think about how you want to put it on the page so that someone else can feel what's driving you. And that means that you're going to have to use connotation, denotation, the shape of the word, the sound of the word, the all of these kinds of things, and the rhythm and the syntax and how many prepositions you use and whether you use them again. All this stuff helps form how you read that poem. And the voice will emerge eventually, and let a critic figure out what your voice is. I've always felt, one of the things I do is that from book to book, I do give myself usually a quite a craft-oriented task for the next, book. Because I work in fragments, often when I finish a book, I'm already got other poems out there, laying around. And sometimes I know that these belong together and those belong together, but they're not ready for a book yet. So I will often, though, once the book gets into copy editing stage, which is one of the most, I don't know, it's just one of the most humiliating experiences in the world. You get the copy editor and he says, you use this preposition 390 times or something, and you feel really, oh God. And they discover everything wrong with your grammar. But at that point I said, okay, now I'm going to start writing some poems in which everything is for the third person only. I do it, not that I'm going to stick to that if something pops up and it's in first person. I give myself a wall, a fence to leap over, let's put it that way. Without the fence, it's a little hard just wandering to the field. So I'll say, okay, third person. That's what started Thomas and Beulah. I said I want to write only poems in third person. There were so many first person poems out there. Everybody was, languishing at that time. And then I thought, okay, forget it, third person, I'm going to that. So those are the kind of things that happen with Grace Girls. I said I need to do, I want to explore the lyric. What's the sense of a smaller poem, a lyrical poem? And so it goes. That's helpful. Forget about voice. Can you describe, I don't even know if I can describe anybody's voice. And then, and there are distinctive voices, but I'm content to let them go. It's useful to talk about voice in a classroom situation. I think one of the things that's happened is because creative writing has found a home in the universities, which is wonderful for poets like me and you, that we get to, either get paid for it or, can take those courses. But being in academia means that there are certain rules you have to hit certain marks. And one of those marks is to be able to have a discourse about what you're doing. We have invented a language to talk about poetry. And that language sometimes constricts us from writing the poems. It also can tend to favor shorter poems over longer poems because it's easier to manage in a semester. There's all sorts of stuff, don't get me started. But, it's a devil that we dance with, and I'm really, I think that we have amazing writers in this country because of creative writing programs and what has happened. And I think also that some of our wildness has been tamed because of creative writing programs. But that's what happens in language, and the voice is one of those things.
I think that living life is just so much more important.
I agree.
So that you have things that you see. And if you could say something about that.
Oh, okay, yes. Because The first thing I ask my MFA students when they come in, I say, well, what are your passions? And they say, well, writing. I said, no, not that one. We know that passion. What are your other passions? And if I get a blank look, I know I'm in trouble. But, I say, something drove you here. Something drove you to the page. What drove you to the page? And what I'm trying to say is that, you live first and always and deeply and intensely. And then the writing comes because you need to celebrate that living, curse that living, write through that living. And but the real problem about it, when you get to practical terms, is how do you live and have enough time to write at the same time? And I kind of moaned when you said that because it's a constant battle. I think most of my life now, I think this period of my life has been really marked by the idea of trying to just stamp out time to write. And then you got it, and you sit there going, oh gosh, this is my time to write. I gotta write. It's, gosh, I wish we were young again. Nobody listened to me. I just kind of wrote and had all the time in the world. But what can help is, it really can help to have a time to write. And to make that time, if you can make it, the time when you feel the most energetic and the most vibrantly alive. That sounds kind of silly, but you just sit there and go, am I a night person or am I a day person? Or maybe you're not either, but what time, when are you really full of energy? If you can write during that time, you will be so much more efficient. I hate to use that word, but you will be so much more efficient in charge than if you're struggling through any other time. I'm a nocturnal person. I write best from midnight to 6. I have always been a night person. I struggle against it my whole life, because the rest of us must be very chipper in the morning, and I'm not. But at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, doesn't matter how little sleep I've gotten, I just start to perk up. So, what do? You try to have afternoon classes, and you also try to have, you try to have some time to do it. And if you can't, then you write anyway. I think it was David Ignato who wrote these brilliant little poems, short poems, and he wrote short poems because he had a full-time hard job, and he said, I got home, I'm tired. I only had a little bit of time to write, but I wrote in that time. And then and if you're going to be tired when you come home, then you're going to get up in the morning and do it. Do it when you're fresh. Do it when you're ready for it. The rest of most of the stuff in life you can almost sleepwalk through. You know that. But you can't do that with poetry. You can't.
You have about 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Poem. Yeah,
A poem.
Read this.
What do you want? I don't know. I can't think. Anyone have a suggestion? Okay, that's a good idea. Something from Sonata Melodica, because it's a very different enterprise, this book, it's not really a story in verse, because I get the verse over with I get the story with the way right away. I'll read you a poem. 3 minutes and I'm wasting them. Okay. Let me read this poem, which is, do you want a light poem or do you want a dark poem?
Dark.
All right. This is going to be mostly dark. 10-year-old, mixed race, violin, prodigy, and his name is George Bridgetower. The year is 1790, actually. He got everything in the world going for him, right? Because everyone wants to see him, but they don't see him. And he's appearing on stage with another little 10-year-old boy who is French, and they appear together for the contrast between white and black. Concert at Hanover Square. Do not think for a moment that we were boys. Souls in a like anguish, perhaps, or when in a fortunate instant we forgot ourselves, gray mice biting each other's tails, rolling in the grass in our woolen knickers. We did not understand how to covet. We knew hatred because we could smell it all around us. It sang in the cool glasses, tinkling over our heads, the carefully tended laughter, the curious glint of a widow's appraisal. As for competition, well, want was a quality I could taste. Music set my body a royal. I was nothing if not everything when the music was in me. I could be fierce. I could shred the heads off flowers for breakfast with my bare teeth simply because I deserved such loveliness. If this was ambition or hatred or envy, then I was all these things, and so was he. Two ragdolls set out for tea in our smart red waistcoats. We suffered their delight. We did not fail our parts, not as boys, nor rivals even, but men, broken, then improperly mended, abandoned far beyond the province of the innocent.
Rita Dove. All right. Rita will be reading tomorrow on the main stage at 3:15 tomorrow afternoon at NJPAC. So thank you. One more hand for Rita Dove.